Welcome, everybody. This is the Artist Talk with Kristine Donnelly here at the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery. We are currently in the 2019 Ohio Juried Biennial, and she is one of 62 artists that were selected to be a part of this exhibition. And rather than steal any of your thunder, I'm going to let you share your entire path and what brought you to the place and this kind of work. So
Great.
Excited to hear about it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. I'm so excited to be here and to be a part of this show. The work is lovely and varied, and as a person making what is now non-representational work, anytime I apply for anything, I always wonder how it will be received. So I feel really thankful to be a part of such a great show. So I'm going to take you through my work and how I started making abstract cut paper sculpture. It was a long and interesting journey, in my opinion. These are some details of more recent works. As I show you work and talk about the evolution, keep in mind everything I make is cut by hand with an X-Acto knife. So there's this labor that happens by choice. But my background is in figure painting. I went to Indiana University, and at that time, their school is a very traditional figure painting school. I was taught to work from direct observation, and I had a mirror in my studio, and I painted myself because I couldn't afford models, and I was willing to stand in awkward poses for a while. And the work was all about light and form, nothing about metaphor or concept or anything. And I loved painting. I loved color, I loved oils, I loved the history of painting, and for a while that was enough. That kept me really entertained. And I kept making figure paintings after I graduated. And I took a couple of years off, and in 2005, I started at University of Cincinnati in their master's program. And I ended up being there for 4 years. I was getting my Master's of Fine Arts as well as my Master's in Art Education because I knew I wanted to teach. And so having 4 years for a graduate degree, it was really this gift. It enabled me to kind of think about what I wanted to make, what was important to me, and my work really changed a lot. When I started there, I was still painting people, and I had been living in Baltimore before that, and I moved back to Cincinnati, and I rented this apartment, and it was a 4th floor walk-up. It had no air conditioning. It was right by a Skyline Chili, and I could smell Skyline at like 9 in the morning. I don't even think they're open at 9 in the morning. It was a terrible place, but it had this tile floor in the bathroom. It had this subway tile, and I knew that I needed to put this pattern in my artwork. And so I rented the place and I sweated, and it ended up that there was an opera singer living next door who sang like in the middle of the night, and I don't think he was very good. It was a terrible place to live, but this tile floor, I was so enamored with it. I loved that you could see flowers or not see flowers. I would just look at it and how it was so polished and you could get lost in its repetition. And I started doing a series of paintings where I was painting the figure, but it was foreshortened. I took a bunch of aerial photos. So the figure was distorted, and I was trying to break away from what I had learned at IU. There was no shadow. The figure was existing on this different plane that they just happened to be living on the same plane. And I started to then sandwich the little flowers on top of the figure. And as I was painting it, I realized that I didn't care about the person. I was trying to push them out of the way. I was really interested in the patterns. And so then I stopped painting people. I was still working with oils, and I knew I was interested in pattern and repetition, so I went to the library and probably checked out every book on ornament and design and the history of decoration, and just started responding to these different decorations, different patterns that I saw, and I would trace them with carbon paper onto panel and then paint them. It was really ridiculous, it took forever. And the oil paint, by nature, it's so soft, it wouldn't dry. I was really struggling to get a hard edge. And that struggle was starting to become annoying. I started layering the patterns on top with paper, like painting paper and adding it on. And I was kind of questioning the idea of what's the composition? What's the focal point? I was so used to having something with a figure painting draw you in and kind of keep you contained. And now I was dealing with something that by nature, there shouldn't be a focal point, kind of questioning how do I handle this new geometry. The color started to get diluted as well. I was using a lot of white and using a lot of wax to make it really not slick and not chunky. And then I started working with paper. Immediately, it just was this breath of fresh air. I felt like with oil paint, there's this history with oil paint in Western culture, and all of my painting heroes, I felt like that was starting to weigh on me, and starting to work with paper, it was a fresh slate. Everyone understands paper. We all encounter paper every day. Usually everyone touches paper every day, and I loved that. It was really rewarding. You could cut it, it could be clean edges, it could be flat. When I didn't hang it perfectly, it started to buckle and become sculptural. I loved that there was no color, no texture. I was using smooth paper, and there was no history behind it. I loved how it was such a pedestrian material, but I could transform it into something different. And even now, I'm still working with paper, and I love the contradictions of it. It's fragile, but if you work with it in a certain way, it can be really strong. I love this process of really painstakingly cutting into something that is ephemeral, that it will fall apart. I've definitely destroyed my own artwork often. I love that you can transform it, but there's always a point when you can realize, oh, that's paper. So I boxed up all my oil paints, which was really pretty heartbreaking because I still love the material and the color, and I love teaching painting to my students. But I started just working with paper. And I basically spent a year working with this one pattern. It was this Victorian fleur-de-lis pattern. I wasn't really interested in the Victorian era. I just loved the shapes of it. And I cut it and strung it, and I printed it onto, I made linoleum prints with it and printed it onto tracing paper and layered the paper and cut it out. And I made molds and casts, and I strung it up. And I made a really large cutting of it, and then all the remnants I stitched together and kind of played around with scale. And it was a year of experimentation. And that process of working with one pattern and this kind of choreographed act of cutting, I got to know each shape so intimately. It was very meditative and a very interesting experience, thinking about what's important here. Is it the positive forms? Is it the negative forms? As the work was becoming sculptural, the shadow in the walls became just as important as the actual work as well. And I felt like I was spending a year basically being a scientist, not really interested in producing anything that could hang in a gallery, just figuring out what I wanted to do with paper and with repetition and pattern. I also, during this year, was thinking a lot about wallpaper and decoration and advertisement and the things that we see all the time but maybe stop seeing. That idea that you could be in a space so often that you forget the design on the carpet. Or you can walk down a street and you always see these advertisements and posters and they stop having an effect on you, they just become a part of your environment. So I would take flyers and cut designs into them. That act of working on a meaningless material that's commercially printed and then cutting something into them. The patterns were Art Nouveau and Art Deco patterns, which I still am really interested in. And I just love the contrast of old and new, organic and mechanical. In 2007, I had a fellowship where I was able to spend a month in Prague, in the Czech Republic. And I had traveled to Prague years before, and I loved the city and the architecture, and all of the Art Nouveau and the Baroque architecture. And I knew I wanted to go back there, partly for the design and then the rich history of Bohemian lace. I was not interested in learning how to make lace or weave, but interested in that idea that something can be fragile but strong, and the idea of packing shapes together and finding design in that. So I spent a summer there, and I was still doing these strange drawings and cuttings where I would take flyers and newspapers and obliterate them, cut things out or cover them, putting designs on top of, in this situation, words that I couldn't read anyway. And as I was working in my studio, I started replicating the patterns I would see around the city. Different ironwork, different lattice work. I took all these photos of people's curtains and their windows and the different silk patterns they had on the curtains. And as the work was hanging in my studio, it was starting to become more 3D. And I was also breaking away from the like grid of a normal pattern, taking an idea, the idea of a repetition, but then pushing it more. This is a piece that I did on the wall of my studio. It is inspired by a ginkgo leaf, which I am still really interested in that shape. And it's these fan shapes that twist, and there's a gradient in the color. I was getting a little tired of just white paper. So it goes from white to cream to brown. And there's a lot of motion to it, and I was trying to get as much height off of the wall as possible. And this was a point where I was working with paper, and I was using glue dots, which are these little craft, like dried rubber cement that you can use to attach things. And I was really reflecting on where I had come from as far as, painting with oils and stretching canvas and using rabbit skin glue and oil primer and all of these materials. And then it's just thinking about, well, whatever works, anything, you can stick it to the wall. When I came back, it's a flip phone, okay? Are we? Hard. That it? When I came back, does that sound okay? Sorry, guys. Oh no. I know. Keep you in suspense for okay. Better? Okay. I felt like there's a little echo. So when I returned to Cincinnati, I started really building off of the idea of breaking away from a rigid pattern. And I had been thinking about how lace is made and the idea of quantity and how things can be become stronger if there are more of them. And I was looking at different cellular structures, plant structures, and thinking about the idea of a cell and how cells are packed and stacked together, and the different membranes and layers. And at this point, I started screen printing. I felt like I'm always questioning what should be handmade and what tools I can use to expedite the process a little bit with still having my hand involved in it. And sometimes I'll trace and use carbon paper and things, but screen printing, I can still be pretty bossy with that. So I started making stencils in Photoshop and printing them out and printing color and then using that to help determine what I would be cutting. And so these are layered pieces cases where I'm working with a stencil and I'll print a couple of them like together to make it bigger and then start cutting from there. There's another detail. And then here is where I felt like I had grown out of the rectangle, if you will, of a painting. I was still working with these cellular shapes, deciding what to cut, what to leave, but the work I wanted to start emulating and mimic drapery, thinking about the bolts of fabric that can curl onto the ground, using the wall and using the floor. This is a piece called Cover Up. It is pretty large. It's about, in its entirety, it's about 20 feet wide, and it's hung at eye level. The wall, ideally the wall of the gallery, is painted the same color as the paper. So if you stand a certain way, it totally blends in. And then if you shift a little bit, you see this reflective color. I was starting to think about the idea of not telling the audience everything, kind of hiding things, suggesting this color, suggesting there's more to the story that's behind the scenes. And also that idea that of the rolls that are hung there, there's so much that's rolled up that you don't even get to see. The panels vary in length from 8 to 20 feet. So there's a lot to it that the viewer might not fully get to see. Here's a detail of it. And this is Strathmore drawing paper. I buy it by the roll. This is a piece that, very similar to that, it is vellum. Vellum is that transparent drafting paper. Kind of looks like tracing paper, so there's this translucency to it. And the piece is suspended, so when you look at it, you see the work, but then you see through it as well. And I wanted there to be that interaction where there's this negative space and you're looking around it and kind of questioning, is it the work or is it the space the work is created? And at this point, I was really thinking about biology and blood and life. And when you hang this work, depending on the ventilation system, it might shift a little bit and kind of move, and that vibration, that energy from it. This is I thought I'd talk a little bit about process with this piece. We talked about material. So this is a shot of me trying to untangle everything before I hung it at one point. They're large panels. All the color is screen printed. And what I'll do is I will screen print, like it's on a big roll, I'll screen print it and then move it over and screen print the next thing. And just, I can register it pretty well. It's not perfect, but it's pretty okay. And then the panels are hung individually at varying heights depending on the space that it's in. So it is an installation that in this space at the Carnegie in Covington, Kentucky was very tall. It's now on view at 21C Museum in Cincinnati, and it's shorter and longer, so it can be kind of like a chameleon. Another process shot of how it looks when I cut things. I use an X-Acto knife, and it usually takes about a half hour to an hour to cut a square foot, depending on how complex it is. The quicker it goes is related to how often I'm cutting it. I use just an X-Acto knife, and for a while I would save all the remnants and try and make something else out of them, but then it was like, they were just everywhere. And normally I find them everywhere, in my shoes. I went to a yoga class last week and I was unrolling my yoga mat, there was some paper stuck to the other side of the mat, so it's like dog hair or something. But I just stand and sit when I cut, whatever works. And quite often, I'm making something for a space that I can't put it together until I'm in the space. So normally I don't see everything until I'm installing it, unless I can like do a dry run and hang it somewhere else. So that's just a detail of like something before I could never really get it fully open. This is a piece called Bear, where I really wanted to play off that kind of peekaboo idea with decoration. The work is cream, and the wall is cream also. And I even used some mud and paint and made it look like it was like growing out of the wall. You can see in the bottom corner. In this piece, I was taking photos of wrinkles on people's faces. Still thinking about cells and skin and details. And then I was making a pattern of them in Photoshop and screen printing it on paper, but I wasn't using any color with the screen prints. It's just a matter of putting the stencil on. And in this piece, I stopped changing my X-Acto knife so often. So in certain places, the patterns are not fully cut out. There's ripping, and I'm leaving things partly hanging off, if you will. So you can kind of see there's this struggle that is intentional and really obvious. And to me, that is a part of it. You know, the work is laborious by choice, and I want the viewer to see my hand in it and the choices that I'm making, and also the failures that I'm allowing myself to have. I don't want to erase pencil lines or anything like that as well. And in this piece, I really wanted to start going off of the wall. So I was in places tying it together to make it like little nests. So it'll come off the wall, maybe 10 inches, depending on the humidity in the gallery. In 2010, I had an exhibit at the Taft Museum of Art in Cincinnati. And they had this exhibition series where they would invite a local emerging artist to make work in response to something in the museum. And at that point, the artist that they had chosen before me would pick a certain painting or sculpture and kind of make a response to that. But for me, the Taft, because it's this historic home, I was really struck by just the interior design of the space. And this is the music room, and it has these, it's my favorite room still, it has these, it's all rococo, so it's over the top swirls and very decorative furniture, and the drapery, I was enamored with them, and the motion of them, and the rhythm, and the color. So I made this piece called Pose, and much like the piece before that, the paper I painted to match the color of the gallery walls. So there's a certain spot where you don't see it, and then if you shift a little, you see peaks of gold coming through. And I wanted the rhythm to kind of echo the energy of the drapery and the idea of music and music notes and of music style. This is just a process shot. I was still thinking about lace patterns and cells, and made some Photoshop designs that combine the two. So this is an example of what would have been on my screen when I was screen printing to make this piece. And this is a process shot in my studio. I painted just a section of wall to see how it would blend in. And then the pattern is a gold color. And this was a big experiment because I rolled latex paint onto paper, and then the other side is in acrylic screen print. And I really didn't know how it was going to turn out, or frankly how it would hold up. There's always this question, you're working with a fragile material. Is this archival? Can I buy this? How do I upkeep this? So far it's really holding on well. I wondered with the latex when I would roll it, but it's not cracking or anything. That's another sculpture of mine in the foreground, but a side view on the left. So at this point, I was and am still kind of questioning what materials to use. I love paper and the history of paper and the failure of it, but I wanted to make work that could kind of push the envelope a little bit more. So I started working with Tyvek as well, and that's what this piece is. Tyvek is that material that you wrap houses in it. It's waterproof and nearly indestructible, and you can buy it on a roll that doesn't say a name brand. So I bought a giant roll of it, and I kind of questioned, like, is this cheating? It looks like paper, but it doesn't rip like paper. But I've decided I'm okay with it. So I made this piece, which is called Ebb and Flow. And I had been going through old photos and found this photo of my grandmother, my Nana, and her wedding dress. And in the photo, the train of her dress has this really dramatic swirl. And I remember asking her about it, like, this is a strange photo, this is a strange arrangement. And she told me this story about how right before they were taking photos, one of her flower girls was going to be sick. And my Nana ripped her dress out of the way so that way the little girl wouldn't be sick on the dress. And then in doing that, got lipstick all over it. So they had to arrange the dress to hide the lipstick, which I thought was just the greatest story. So anyway, I wanted to make something that was in reference to her, and also something that was more about the floor than the wall. I felt like it needed to start on the wall, but most of it needed to be on the floor. In the pattern, I didn't want to use any type of template. I wanted the pattern to echo the natural shape of the sculpture, and so I took a graphite stick and just started drawing swirls and scribbles on it. And then instead of cutting out the lines, I was cutting out the space around it, so kind of questioning which is the important thing. Is it the positive space or the negative space? So there are parts that are very thin because it's Tyvek and you can get away with that, and parts that are fatter. And this is a piece that, this is the original shape that I normally hang it in, but it is kind of a chameleon where I'll let it take other forms as well. And this is another Tyvek piece called Horizon. Let me find the dimensions here. This is a piece that is 70 feet in length, and I say that shaking my head because I never saw it in its fruition until I installed it originally horizontally. I think this is a piece that I'm still kind of figuring out what it's meant to be. But with Tyvek, you can get away with a 70-foot panel and it will not rip. I'll just show you a detail of the pattern. So I wanted to, it's two different patterns. One is a pretty traditional circular pattern, and the other is kind of a wild pattern. And there's this drawn mark that you can see at the top left that is kind of interrupting it. And it was something that I wanted it to be like a dialogue between these two patterns. It goes back and forth between the rigid and the wild, if you will, and kind of like if you hang it horizontally, it's surrounding you and it's different parts to a conversation. I think as I work, maybe my next piece is always the opposite of the previous one. At this point, I was so tired of white that I started painting the Tyvek, which was another experiment. Can you paint Tyvek? Will that work? And so far you can. This is a piece called Once in a While. It is 4 panels of Tyvek that range from blue, deep blue to light blue. It's my answer to a Monet landscape. As much as I'm not making paintings, painting is still where I go anytime I'm not sure of anything, frankly. And I was looking at this one Monet and that idea of atmospheric perspective and being deep in color at the top and lighter at the bottom. And I wanted to make something like that that was top heavy, that would make you look up because there was more saturation at the top. And the other side is this kind of taupe mauve color. I was thinking about when you mix all the colors together and you get that gross color, and how you can turn that muddy color into something pretty. And again, the shapes are just irregular with this. So as I'm making these sculptures, I get the question a lot, well, how long does it take you to make them? And it depends. That I think took about 3 months. Sometimes like this piece took 9 months. Sometimes they take a year. It is, usually the cutting is like the quick part. It's the design part that always is the longest part. But as I'm making them, I'm always making smaller work as well. And that, one, it gives me like some sanity and some sense of completion because there's a start and a finish, and it's usually in a couple months or something. But also they give me the chance to test out colors and patterns, like a little maquette, a sketch that I can then apply to something else. So these, some of them, like this is on a scroll, so I can play around with getting that depth. Some of them are totally flat. But that's how I find my different patterns and play around with scale, and also different types of paper, and how do I apply the color? Am I painting? Am I screen printing? Am I buying colored paper? Lots of different ways. I think what I'll do, in talking about this piece, I'm just going to kind of relate it back to my roots in figure painting. Because as much as I know I'm making sculptures, like if I had to put my name on a line, I think it would still be figure painting. I think that's still how my mind works. So years ago, before I would make a painting, I would make a bunch of sketches, thinking about my different elements and moving them around. And anytime I think about layout and composition, I'm always thinking about triangles and negative space. And how do I make the negative space important? So these are some process sketches for a painting that I did years ago. And then this was the end result of the painting, the end result of the movement. And I'll show this painting to my students, and I'll say, count the triangles, you should see a lot of them. You always need triangles, that's how you get movement. So kind of thinking about that and the idea of having many parts and thinking of myself as like the director. I'll talk about how this piece came to be. So this piece is called Head Over Heels. And when I'm coming up with titles, I really love alliteration. I just think it flows. And I love top-heavy things that make you look up more than look down. So when I was making this piece, it all started with this coral color, this salmon color. And sometimes it starts with a color, sometimes it's with a pattern. For me, this was the Pantone color of the year last year, and I was in love with this color even before I found that out. I like to say that I'm a trendsetter. But I came up with a color formula of coral and light blue and this Kermit the Frog green and this brown. And I screen printed, or I painted Tyvek. I rolled acrylic on several panels of Tyvek and started cutting patterns into the paper. And there's Art Nouveau, there's a lace pattern, there's some irregular scribbles. I made, I don't know, maybe like 10 different panels, many more than you see here, to give me different options. I knew I wanted it to be geometric as well as organic, and to have some areas that were cut really thinly and others where you saw a lot of the paint. And some of the panels have the same color on both sides and some have different. So just like those figure painting sketches, in my studio, I just started coming up with arrangements. And the cardboard is only because my walls are plastic. semester, and so I need something to tack into because there's a lot of tacking that happens. So these are 6 of, I don't know, maybe 20 different arrangements, but I was trying to figure out what this needed to be. And the end result is what you see here. And this is a photo you can kind of compare. When I hang things in galleries, there's always a little change to it based on what I think the space needs. This was a space where you couldn't step away that far from it, so it's a little more dense and it's a little different here. But the same idea, I was also thinking about like that, and I'll move to the side for a second. My niece is in 6th grade, and last year she learned about like sarcasm and said "so" for the first time, like "so." And I remember her putting her hand on her hip like this. It just was so funny, but I just thought how that angle can change everything. So I wanted to do something that had this motion to it as well. So always thinking about how I can relate this back to me. Here's the detail of it here. And I think with this piece, there are so many panels that I didn't use, like this green and all this brown. And for me, that's a lot of what I've learned over the last couple of years is I know I need a lot of options. I can't plan things to a T because it never works out that way. It's better to have more options and then kind of get a game plan together in my studio. And then even in the gallery, knowing that things might change again based on the space and what the space needs. There's one more shot here. And that is all. Do you have any questions?
So did you always go and install your work, or did you ever sit?
That's a great question about installation. So if I can, I will install it because I think it is just easier on the gallery. I did install this piece here. I have had work that I've had other people install, and the installation instructions are just, they're very silly, like hang this so it piles on the ground. But if I can, I'm in the process of, I'm planning a piece right now that I want to build a structure for it that then could be installed easily by other people. So that's a part of kind of my learning curve because I think of myself as a painter. So figuring out how do I install these things, it's been a big evolution. And I'll pull up this piece. I had to suspend this over a rotunda, so I learned a lot about vinyl coated cable and so this was a piece where I thought, as much as I think I'm so bossy and I want to be totally in control of my artwork, that's a part of it, like it's all me, it's all my hand. But I needed help hanging it, and I needed a lot of help planning it because I knew that I didn't want it to fall down.
So did you roll them?
Yeah, yeah, I roll everything to transport it, and that way it starts very easily. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you're working on something, do you ever show it to somebody and get people you trust to critique your work?
Yes, yeah. Because things take so long, the more feedback I can get on initial ideas and in-process things, the better it is. Because sometimes what is in my head, and I think is going to be amazing, midway through I might even question it. So I think that I'm really thankful that in Cincinnati we have a great community of artists and curators that will come and look and give encouragement or redirection when both are helpful. Anyone else?
So is that Untitled, or is that?
This is vellum. This is tie-back. Yes. Yeah.
I think your work is amazing.
Thank you so much.
And I'm thinking about the sort of compulsive nature of the obsession, and I think that's true for all artists. That whatever that work is that you do, you go back to it and you do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it's something that just has to come out, and it's a repetitive process. And Could you kind of speak to that? What keeps you going? And
Sure.
coming back to this and continue to experiment and grow and change to a different form
That's just, it is so obsessive. And I think that somebody was asking me, well, how do you have the time for this? And I'm a full-time high school teacher, and I have found, and I'm sure that all of you would agree, like, you make time for what you care about. And so I used to have a studio elsewhere. That was too much to drive here. So I work in a spare bedroom in my house, which is why I'm taking cut paper to yoga. And so that way, if I have 10 minutes in the morning in my PJs, I'll cut some paper. A few minutes at night. If I have to do something messy, I'll do it in my garage or elsewhere. But a lot of it is pretty dry. But it is so meditative. Not just the part of cutting, but just this idea of working with a repeated pattern and repeated design. That part of the art is really safe and relaxing. The design part is, I think it's the scary part, like trying to plan it, trying to figure it out. When I get to the production part, it's just this breath of fresh air. And I think for me as a person, I'm an introvert, and this is like my happy place where I can recharge and reflect on everything else that's happening. Yeah, so I guess that's my response. Yeah.
So I notice in your work, and as you talk about it, it's a lot about the intersection. So you have the intersection of the past and present with the filigree of the past and material of the present. I love that you talk about your niece and her contrapposto,
Yes, exactly.
which then references your figure drawing, which, contrapposto, the Kronos man was the first
Right.
to have
Yeah.
the contrapposto stance that then allowed us to see movement in sculpture. And you also are playing the line between sculpture and painting,
Right.
essentially. So can you talk more about what draws you to these kind of polarized things and making them come together?
Sure, that's a great observation. When I was 20, I studied in Florence, Italy, and there was this, and I honestly almost put it in this slideshow. There was this Pontormo painting of, I think it's the Resurrection of Christ, and it's all these people, and it's peaches and blues and reds. And I remember I would go and visit it like every day. It was pretty close to where I was living. You'd put a quarter in this machine and the light would turn on for a second. And I remember looking at it and just looking at the negative space, and it was like a blue-gray background. And I think about that. I have that painting hanging up in my studio, and I think about that painting a lot. And when I was starting to make this journey from figure painting to sculpture, I was really thinking about the idea of decoration and ornament, and I love the idea of wallpaper and how it's meant to be quiet, but not. Should you notice it, should you not? And I feel like each piece of mine on that scale of focal point to background, each piece might be a different, maybe a different number on that scale. And that is pretty interesting to me. And I think so much of, as much as I was saying that the history of figure painting became burdensome, I can't help but that's just in my DNA, like the contrapposto. It's a part of it. And when I go to museums, I was looking at a Bouleyard last time I was in New York, and I took a photo of it because I knew there was this rule of thirds thing with the composition and the color, and those are the things that's still how I process things, and I know that I'll use that at some point. Anybody else?
What's next?
I am working on, so just thinking about how I start. So I'm starting a piece that I know is going to have gold in it, like a luminous gold, and I'm a little scared by that because shiny things, usually I'm anti-shiny things, but it's going to have gold and navy blue. And I'm picturing something that is going to be really dense at the bottom of the sculpture and thinner at the top, like the idea of when you're outside at night and the intersection of the trees in front of like a full moon. So that's kind of, right now I'm going to mix some colors this weekend and start to figure out, and that's going to be paper. I want to take a break from Tyvek and go back to working with paper and that carefulness, because I think sometimes I can get a little too wild. So every piece is a reaction to the next one.
And then you just recently said something that maybe you've been saying all the way through, but do you see these as distinctively sculptural or distinctively painting, or do you change based on how they're set up?
I would say this piece I see as a sculpture. The flat collages that I make, I would call those paintings probably. The piece that I'm envisioning making, it's going to be 3 panels that are going to hang, but just hang straight, so I don't know what that'll be. I'll get back to you. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you.
So, thank everybody for coming, everyone that's viewing online. This exhibition will be up until January 10th. We're closed on the official holidays, but we'd love to see you, so please come back on.